Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to this information session today. On behalf of the Sydney Dementia Network, Pradeep and I are extremely excited to be chairing this webinar, which is really aimed at not only highlighting the current DARF grant opportunities available this year, but to also put in front of you those who have gone before and been successful in receiving funding in this ever-challenging funding environment. But first, in beginning this webinar, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of land on which we are working today and recognize their continuing connection to land, water, and culture. The Sydney Dementia Network are in the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect, of course, to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander persons attending this webinar today. And I encourage you to include the name of the land on which you are joining on today in the chat below. Okay, so today's panel of speakers, and you can probably see them on your screen now, they've been carefully selected to put in front of you the right people to not only help you prepare an application across the various categories for which funding is available this year, but also to share their all-important tips and tricks for a successful application. And of course, things to be mindful for and avoid in preparing your application this year. To maximize the time now, I'm not going to introduce each of the speakers. I'll leave that just right before they're about to present. But what I will do before we start with our first speaker is just remind us of a bit of housekeeping. And that is half of this session today is dedicated to a live Q&A. And so if there are any questions that come up throughout the talks that you want to have answered by our panel, could you please include them in the Q&A box? So there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Click that and put your question there. So we have it all in one spot. Try to avoid putting it into the chat. As I said, we want to have it all in one place so that we can just very succinctly go through each one of them and make sure we don't miss any of them as we kind of have eyes in many places. Okay, so I guess with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to welcome our first speaker, Dr. Annette Moxey, who's the General Manager for the Dementia Australia Research Foundation. The person you all want to hear from is going to be telling us all about this year's grant opportunity, what's new, what's different. And so welcome, Annette. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Unmute. Thank you so much. Can you see my slides? I hope so. Yes. Thank you so thank you so much for another year of the Dementia Grants program. It's this is my 12th grant round that I've been involved in. And each year we always receive something, new and exciting and innovative. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what the next bunch of applications bring this year. So to get started, today I'd like to provide an outline of our program this year, including where we've made some changes. We've also got a number of new initiatives to share, and I'll also provide just some other useful tips with regards to the process. So as you might know, we fund researchers across all stages of their careers, but maintain a particular focus on early and mid-career researchers and in any field of research as well. So funding varies from year to year, but depending on the donations that we receive. And you may have noticed that our grant round isn't quite as large as previous years. As we rely entirely on donations, we have advertised a more conservative grant round this year. Due to the current economic and geopolitical environment. However, we do hope that we were able to award more applications and more grants and fellowships than we've advertised if it's feasible for us to do so. So this year we're supporting people and projects. So we've got fellowships, professional development grants, stipends, project grants, and a research translation grant. So to kick it off, this year we've expanded our travel grant scheme to include professional development and also collaboration. The grant can be used for professional development activities as well as traveling internationally or nationally, learning new techniques, building networks with well-known researchers, industry, and people with a living experience of dementia. The only tip I'd add here is that if you're visiting another institution, please make sure that you provide a letter of support from that institution or department just to show that they agree to host you and that should be provided at the time of application. Next up, we have postdoctoral fellows, and they will also be able to benefit from this initiative this year. Award recipients will be able to apply for up to $15,000 in professional development during the course of their fellowship. However, you don't need to include that information at the time of application. So you'll be able to apply for that when you are ready during your fellowship. A few other things to note about postdoctoral fellowships is if the award does not fully cover you for your salary, your university or another funding source will need to top that up. Our fellowships are also intended to be the primary fellowships, so it's not to be used to top up an existing fellowship, say through the NHMRC. And also salary indexation may be applied each year, so you'll get a little bit of a boost each time. One award will be supported by Race Against Dementia in the areas of prevention and treatment. This award's geared more towards lab research and offers mentoring opportunities through the Race Against Dementia Fellowship Program. This is a highly prestigious award. It's up to 5 years in duration. But please note that as Race Against Dementia Fellows already receive a lot of professional development and support through their award, they won't be eligible for the extra $15,000 that we're offering this year to our other fellows. To avoid confusion, the postdoctoral application should be for 3 years. Race Against Dementia Fellows are reviewed at the 3-year mark to make sure that their work is progressing at a satisfactory rate. So if you submit a proposal for a 3-year timeline and progress is deemed satisfactory, you'll be able to apply or put an extension in for years 4 and 5 and describe what you'll be doing then. If it's appropriate, you can include a brief outline of years 4 and 5 in your application, or you might be able to even highlight that at interview. So yes, an interview is required for all Race Against Dementia Fellows and for those who are shortlisted. However, also top-ranked postdoctoral fellowship applicants may also need an interview if the scores are very competitive and similar. So our mid-career research fellowship scheme aims to support researchers to continue their progress to becoming leaders in the dementia field, and it also provides an opportunity for mid-career researchers to establish their own research programs. So again, if the award doesn't fully cover your salary, your university or another funding source will need to top that up, and indexation may also be applied to salary. Award recipients will also be able to apply for a $15,000 professional development funding during their fellowship. And as mentioned, an interview might also be required if the top-ranked applicants are very close in scores. Clinical practice postgraduate stipends are also available, and they're designed to support a health professional undertake a PhD and embark in a career in dementia research. So often research ideas and practice improvements come from observations in clinical practice. So we would like to support a health professional to bring those research ideas into a reality. The applicant must have a health professional background, for example, medicine, nursing, physio, speech pathology, and so on. And the successful applicant will need to show that they're enrolled in a PhD by the commencement of funding, which is usually in March of the following year. The funds may be used to backfill the applicant's salary or research activities and can be taken in conjunction with another scholarship. And so in addition to all our people support, via our fellowships and so on, we also will be offering, once again, project grants. Project grants are intended to help investigators establish their careers as an independent dementia researcher through these small time-limited research projects or pilot projects. They also enable researchers to collect pilot data, which may then strengthen larger applications to NHMRC and MRFF in the future. And these awards are valued at $85,000. And finally, we have a research translation grant will be awarded to research exploring the real-world adoption of strategies that aim to improve the quality of life of people living with dementia, their families and carers. So the funding available might vary slightly depending on the quality of the applications and the proposed budget. So for example, within a total funding pool of $200,000, more than one award may be given out. The project should focus on moving evidence through the pathway to practice. So, for example, a real-world evaluation of interventions and strategies that have been subject to a lot of pilot work already and have shown to be effective, or the adaptation of interventions or strategies that are already shown to be working well in other countries, and you want to test that in the Australian context. As translation research may involve partnerships with industry, implementation science experts, and other stakeholders, up to 10 investigators can be included on the application, and at least one of those need to be a mid or early career researcher. So the slight changes in this one from previous years is that we would like you all to provide letters of support from any partners that are involved in the project so that the panel is able to assess the feasibility of your proposal. The grant is also open to a broader area of dementia research. So in the past, it's been very care focused, but now we've broadened that out a little bit. So, but please note that early stage preclinical type work would not be considered as part of this scheme. So moving on to what we're doing differently, which is all very exciting. So we have a couple of new initiatives this year. Dementia Australia and the Sachs Institute have partnered to develop the Dementia Research Platform, which brings together 20 years of longitudinal data through the 45 and up study, as well as at least 10 linked data sets that comes with that. So the platform will offer Dementia Australia Research Foundation funded researchers with direct access to the data set for investigating dementia risk or progression or outcomes at a population scale. So in 2026, the applicants can indicate in their proposal if they require access to this platform. And so that's the process there. So you can please reach out to the Sachs Institute if you've got any technical questions or queries about what's in the data sets, so what's the data dictionaries, that sort of thing. Indicate in your application that you would like access to this and include it in part of your methodology. And shortlisted applications will be reviewed by the Sachs Institute to ensure that what you're asking of the data is feasible and can actually work. So applicants that get to that stage will be contacted and may be required to provide additional information. So we also value the involvement of people with a living experience of dementia, their families and carers in research, as it makes for better projects and where the outcomes are more likely to be implemented into practice and directly benefit those impacted by dementia. So what I've got here is a training program that we've put together to help researchers work meaningfully and effectively with people with a living or lived experience of dementia. And it's called Stronger Research Together, Stronger Research Together. And it includes a series of videos with people with living experience and researchers talking about their openly about their experience in working together on research projects. There's also a series of useful resources, quizzes, and there's a certificate of completion at the very end. So you can that can be used for CPD points if you like. And I've got the QR code there. So please complete the course when you're able to and recommend it to all your colleagues. Having this knowledge will help you prepare a stronger application and improve your research more generally. So just quickly, some other things to know, which I think I may have spoken about at other webinars as well, but they're important to note. Um, Dementia research is a small but growing field, so it is important that conflicts of interest are managed appropriately and the review is free of bias. So to ensure that we have the best possible review of applications, we ask that the research proposal and other sections of the application are de-identified. So we provide some tips about this in the Information for Applicants booklet on how to de-identify your application. For example, don't include your name in the headers of your research proposal. But there are places in the application where collaborators and institutions can be identified. So fellowship applicants can still talk about their team, for example, and previous work and secondments in the career progression section of the proposal. But rest assured that although your methodology will be reviewed separately in the first instance, it will all come together with your track record and as your application moves through the review process. And also to note, just due to the nature of the application, de-identifying is not required for the professional development and research translation awards. If you are successful in receiving a grant, any special conditions can be discussed with us, including the start date and whether part-time fellowship needs to be considered. We also provide feedback on your application. So if you haven't asked already, we can still provide you feedback from last year. And also too, people with a living experience of dementia also review sections of the application. So this review contributes to 20% of your overall score. So it is really important that the sections are written clearly and concisely. So if you haven't already, there's not much time left. If you would like Dementia Australia to put you in touch with a person with living experience of dementia, please reach out to us. There's a link on the Work with an Advocate form on our website. So please get in touch and we'll link you up with some people. Finally, we have an online process for submitting the application. So this is the same as last year. Just simply log in or register to start an application. Our Information for Applicants booklet provides guidance on how to submit your application and having it endorsed by other investigators in your institution, as well as the institution itself. If you have any technical issues, just please contact us. So thank you so much once again for your time today, and I hope that the information provided will help you with your application this year. Again, as I said, please reach out if you have any other questions at foundation@dementia.org.au, and we wish you all the very best with your application.
Thank you, Annette. I'm sure a lot of people will have a lot of questions, and yeah, we'll answer most of your questions during the question time. We next have our lead panel member, Dr. Jane Thompson. She's a dementia advocate. She's going to be talking to us about lived experience insights and strategies for grant applications, and also the language which needs to be used whilst writing a grant application. So all to you, Jane.
Hang on, I'll just get this presentation up.
Sure.
Is that there? Hang on. There we go. Is that? Can you see that now?
Yeah, I can see it now.
Okay, so thanks very much for the introduction. I'm a former carer. My husband died of Alzheimer's disease in 2007, and I've actually been quite actively involved in dementia research since 2010, so quite some time. And I have developed quite a strong interest in how to do public involvement in research well. I've been a member of the Dementia Australia Research Foundation scientific panel. That was back in 2014 to 2019. I've been an occasional reviewer, and I've actually been on a couple of successful DARF grant applications and partnered with researchers on that. So what I'd like to do today is just briefly talk about the language around the involvement in research of the people about whom research is being conducted, and I refer to that as public involvement. And I acknowledge the language in this space is evolving continually, and also that researchers often struggle with this. And I think as a reviewer, I often find the use of loose or inappropriate terms frustrating. So I think it is important to get the language right and clear. I'd like to also give you some ideas about how to meaningfully and respectfully involve people impacted by dementia in research, and also give you my thoughts about what I would expect as a dementia advocate reviewer in your grant application to DARF. And I'll do this in the form of tips that might help you with your application. So firstly, it's about terminology. Researchers interact with the members of the public in a variety of ways, and this can generally be categorised, in my view, into three main ways. Firstly is engagement in research. So this includes researchers raising awareness of research, sharing knowledge, or engaging and creating a dialogue with the public. Participation, that's quite clear. So this is when a person is a study participant, fills out questionnaires, etc. But involvement means that people with relevant experience partner with researchers and contribute to how the research is designed, how it's conducted, and how it's disseminated. So the research is carried out with or by people with that direct or indirect experience of a disease or health condition, rather than to, about, or for them. But the point I want to emphasise here is don't use these terms loosely or interchangeably. A lot of people do. They do have quite specific meanings, so you need to be aware of this when preparing your application. And what we're talking about in these grant proposals is involvement. So that's quite straightforward, shouldn't be a problem, and it aligns with the terms that you'll read in the literature, particularly those used in the UK, who are leaders in public involvement in research. And in Australia, we've generally adopted that UK terminology. But having said that, the terms do vary across countries, and you need to be aware of that if you're reading any of the literature. So there are many terms used to describe involvement in research, both in terms of how we are described and also what we actually do. So the Canadians talk about engagement when we actually use the term involvement. So just be aware if you're looking up say articles about how others have involved people in their research, they might use slightly different terms. So these have evolved continually over time in Australia, mainly over the who rather than what we do. So what used to be called consumer involvement when I first became involvement of people living with dementia, carers and families. Then it became involvement of people impacted by dementia, and now different terms being introduced, such as involvement of people with living experience, or is it lived experience? So there is a continuous sort of shift in the language that we're using in this space. But when it comes to describing who we are and what our role is, well, that's when things get a bit more complex, and people have quite strong preferences around the terms used. I know researchers say they have difficulty knowing what terms to use, and they also don't want to use terms that might offend people. So I've just put up some list there of the sorts of different types of language which is being used. So I fully understand that people get a little bit confused in this space. So here I've just put up some terms to describe us, and I won't go through all of them, but there's also a variety of terms used to describe our roles when we're involved in research. I would say that the term consumer is not used by Dementia Australia anymore. It's still used by the NHMRC though, and I would advise against using it in your application to DARF. Most people don't like it, and including dementia advocate reviewers. So you need to make sure you keep everyone on side. Referring to people who have lived experience, which to me just means personal experience, is quite common, but there's now this new term, living experience, and I have a bit of difficulty distinguishing between living and lived experience myself. Dementia Australia says it covers people living with dementia, families and carers, and that the intentional and deliberate use of the current tense, living versus lived, focuses your attention on the person in front of you. But if you'll see in the information for applicants, they actually refer to people with a living or a lived experience. So are these two different? Are they the same? I'm not sure. Anyway, that's something to think about. But I think the important thing in all of this is to acknowledge and value our expertise, which is derived from our personal experience of dementia. And I would advise that you ask the people who you're involving in research what their preferences are in relation to how they prefer to be labelled. Be clear who you mean and just use your chosen term consistently. So my second tip is around how to meaningfully involve people in your research. And I really like these principles that come from the UK. And what you need to do is to demonstrate that you already have or you are going to continue to involve people impacted by dementia as contributors to or partners in your research, and that you value their contribution. You need to say who will be involved, and you need to say quite clearly how they will be involved. So these principles that I like are really quite simple. Involve the right people. So you need to involve those people who are most relevant and appropriate to your study. So this might mean people with a diagnosis of dementia, with mild cognitive impairment. It might be people at risk. It could be carers, care partners, or both, or people who describe themselves as advocates. But generally, I would recommend that you include, if relevant, both a person living with dementia and a carer or a former carer. And you may be questioned if you say, for example, you only include a carer. And now in some cases, the right people might be the members of the general public, for instance, in risk reduction or research or population-based studies. So how do you find the right people? Well, you might know someone impacted by dementia who has previous experience in involvement in research, or someone you've already worked with. You could approach them and also get others through them or other channels. You could seek examples from other researchers as to how they've approached this, or ask them to connect you with relevant people. Dementia Australia can connect you with relevant people through their Dementia Advocates program. And don't forget that the Sydney Dementia Network has our own lived experience expert advisory panel, and it's a good idea to present your idea to the panel, and maybe some members of the panel will be interested in getting involved in your research. But you also need to say how you're going to select the people to be involved. Are you going to advertise? Are you going to seek expressions of interest? And then how will you decide if the applicants are a good fit? And it's important to document this in your application. You need to think about accessibility, diversity, and inclusion issues. Consider how you try to involve people who reflect the diversity of backgrounds and experiences that you expect your potential research participants or the people who are likely to benefit from your research to have. And also, how will you work with people in a way which is as inclusive as possible? And if involving people with cognitive difficulties, how are you going to support them to be involved? And in terms of involving enough people, so enough people should be involved to provide a reasonable breadth and depth of views on the issues that are likely to be important to the people the study will aim to recruit and or who it's intended to benefit. The right number of people to involve in your research depends on the scope of the study. It should almost always be more than one person, and one person is unlikely to be able to represent the needs and the perspectives of an entire group of people, and it may be unfair to ask one person to take on that responsibility. You may want someone as a lead person who might be listed as an associate investigator on the grant application, but you may also want to have a small advisory group of people with relevant experience. And importantly, not everyone involved in a study has to be involved in the same way. A range of possibilities exist, with different people involved with different tasks, or some people being members of the project team with higher level involvement. And when you're deciding how many people to involve, think about how many people you can actually manage, and it has to be practical and feasible. And it may be helpful to have a nominated contact person on the research team with whom involved people can keep in touch. And then, of course, involving people enough, well, here, this will vary for different types of research and no one size fits all. So relevant people should be involved in as many aspects of the study as is feasible, productive and appropriate to the research and at the right times. And ideally, you would involve them at the earliest stage possible, ideally even before the research begins or in the grant application stage. and then during the research and after the research is end, such as in dissemination or implementation activities. Now, I won't go into what people might do at each stage of the research. There's plenty of resources available for you to access about this, but it is important to document this clearly in your application. So in summary, don't make vague statements like we will establish an advisory group or people impacted by dementia will be involved in all stages of this project. As a reviewer, I would expect you to outline who will be involved, how you will find them, how many will be involved, and be clear what their roles will be. And then the fourth principle, I think, which is often overlooked, is actually it's often very helpful to document what you do and perhaps consider publishing this in a paper, which will help other researchers. So involving people impacted by dementia is just as important for those researchers who work in the laboratory and who may not have direct contact with people with dementia, their care partners and families, or they may be involved, not be involved in direct delivery of healthcare either. So the same principles about who you might involve would apply. Ways of involving people might be a little bit different, but it's still important. There are good examples of research partnerships or buddy pairs between a researcher and a person impacted by whatever they're studying. You might establish an advisory group who you meet with regularly to talk about how the research is going. You could have research priority setting exercises which generate questions that patients and families want basic science research to address. And biomedical researchers say that doing this sort of public involvement work brings focus and context to their research. It provides good practice for their lay communication skills, opens up public engagement channels, and it emphasises the reasons why they're doing the research in the first place. And can also help attract funding if the research is seen to be valued by the people who will benefit from the researchers. Now, some researchers might assume that people might be put off engaging with or getting involved in basic science research, and this is generally not true, with members of the public keen to engage with research at that basic fundamental level. Now, you also need to budget for involvement. This is my third tip. And ideally, you would have a budget to cover any costs associated with involvement and also be able to provide at least some remuneration for involvement. And there is guidance on this that you can get from Dementia Australia. You also need to check the university policy and processes about paying honorariums to volunteers. Some universities do this really well, and others it's a very complex and slow process. My fourth tip is about the plain language summary. And now how the lay summary and other sections to be reviewed by dementia advocate reviewers are written so that they're clear and easy to understand is really important. So really don't want to lose the advocate reviewers at this stage. You need to spend some time on getting this right and also getting advice from the people you're involving. And this is often the first thing that dementia advocate reviewers will look at. It's not the abstract. It's quite a different structure from the abstract that you would write from a scientific paper. You need to be aware of abbreviations and acronyms. Please don't use them unless absolutely necessary or they're really, really standard, well understood ones. Don't use overly technical terms. Talk about DNA methylation and phosphorylated tau, etc., without giving some sort of explanation. This is my slightly tongue-in-cheek slide. I have to tell you, there are so many co-words that I see in the literature these days, it's almost overwhelming. And it seems like if you stick co on front of something that it somehow legitimizes it. There's a plethora of these words. And my point here really is that I wouldn't use them unless you actually give a clear explanation of what they actually mean in the context of your research. And don't say things like, we will co-design with people impacted by dementia, or we will use co-design principles. You need to explain what you mean. And don't use the term if it's not really applicable. So not all involvement is co-design, and nor does it have to be, and not all that is co-design is actually co-design, or what people call co-design is actually co-design. My last tip is around actually accessing and using the resources that are available. So there's a couple of documents which you can find on the Dementia Australia Dementia Australia website of guidance for researchers, some guidance for people interested in getting involved. Critically, you need to look at the dementia language guidelines. There's some clear guidance around what sort of terms are appropriate and which are not. For lab-based researchers, you will find some good information, and I've just put up one as an example. Parkinson's UK has produced some really useful guidance for involvement in lab-based research. And it's already mentioned these new series of videos and guidance for researchers, and they have a similar one for people interested in getting involved in research, which you might perhaps direct people who you're partnering with too. And they're really, really useful. And finally, these grants are very, very competitive. We all know that. And all of those who make the first cut and will be reviewed by dementia advocates are potentially fundable. So you need to make yours stand out from the rest. And a good consideration of how you will involve people impacted by dementia could just make the difference. The dementia advocate reviews may just get yours over the line. So in summary, my top tips to follow when completing your application that will make dementia advocates look favourably upon it. Don't confuse the engagement, participation, involvement terminology, and also use appropriate terms to describe us. You need to follow principles for meaningful public involvement in research, and I think I've outlined those, and you can find plenty of those in some of the guidance documents I've put up for you. You need to budget for your involvement. You must write a good plain language summary, so all the plain language sections must be written in simple, clear language. Beware of those co-words and do access and follow the guidance available. So thank you, and I hope that's helpful, and good luck with your application.
Thank you very much, Jane. That's extremely helpful. Our next speaker is Professor Olivier Piguet, who's a Professor of Clinical Neuropsychology here at the Brain and Mind Centre of the University of Sydney. And importantly for today's session, a previous DARF reviewer, and as well as sat on many other review panels as well. So he's definitely going to be telling us what to be mindful for when preparing the application. What I will say before I hand over to Olivier is that some of you might be wondering if there's going to be a recording available of this webinar. Definitely, we'll aim to finalize the video within the next couple of weeks, and then we will send a link around. So just in case some people are madly trying to take screenshots, there will be a recording. Thank you so much, Olivier.
Thanks, Joe, and welcome everyone. So I've sat on the DARF scientific panel review panel for 6+ years, and I still get requests from Annette every now and again to review additional grant applications because they have some technical aspects that they might need advice about. I will thank Annette and Jane for outlining some of the points that I will cover as well. I won't take too much of your time. Some of these points that I will raise seem obvious, but sometimes they're obvious that people tend to forget about them. So the first aspect is you will have seen the instructions, and make sure that you do read the instructions. There's a number of reasons for that. One is that it's very quickly annoying for reviewers to see that there are bits missing from your application. And also, first of all, you want to make sure that the scope is right for your. I've got a problem with my slides. Yeah. So the question you ask is the scope right for your project, right for the scheme? There's no point in you applying for something if what you want to get funding from is not offered by the grant people. So it's a DARF funding proposal, so you need to look at And so the topics have been outlined in the grant instructions, looking at causes of dementia, reduce dementia risk, looking at new treatments, etc. So it's really important to make sure that what you want to achieve aligns with the grant guidelines. Then what you want to make sure is also that you are covering all the sections that are required in the grant applications, because you're going to be marked on all these sections. And for DAV, there's four aspects. There are the aims, the background, methodology, and the budget. And all these aspects are being graded. So you're going to get a score. And I think Annette might have mentioned that in passing, but there's a two-step process in the application, in the assessment process. In the first pass, you want to make sure that your grant is good enough to get a score that will put you in the top 50%. The top 50% of grants will go to full panel review, where you will get assessed on specific criteria. And these specific criteria are scientific merit or the quality, so that will fall under your aims and backgrounds. You have your track record and independence, so it's about who you are and why, how you will do that. There's the aspect of innovation and significance, and then there's the knowledge translation, which is, well, how does that apply to real life situations? And all these points have different weights. So scientific merit, track record are between 30 and 40%, will contribute between 30 and 40% of the total score, and the other point are 20% and 10%. Again, familiarize yourself about how these different aspects are being weighed, because that will also shape how you want to write your application. Now, Jane has mentioned that the Dementia Advocate assessment, the Dementia Advocate also conduct an assessment, and based on 5 criteria, and their score will contribute to 20% of your final score. So you need to make sure that you address all the points that Jane has raised already in terms of the language used, the benefit for people living with dementia, the involvement of the person or people living with dementia to date, and how they will continue to be involved in your project if you are being funded. The second point to make is really to start early, and there's nothing worse than a poorly constructed application. It's a waste of your time, and it's also a waste of reviewers' time. And it becomes apparent very quickly when a grant application is undercooked. It might be a good idea, but not enough time in trying to outline exactly why you want to do that and how. And I just wanted to focus on 2 aspects. Again, coming back to the scoring criteria. The first one is the aims and background, and the second one is methodology. So, and clarity is key. So for your aims and background, you really need to outline clearly what the gap is. So you need to be able to provide a short and succinct review of the existing literature that will lead to your hypothesis. So you need to have a logical flow in your story, but you also need to outline what the novelty is. So you're not doing just another study that has been done previously. So there needs to be something novel about what you want to do, and also outline what the importance of that is. You may know why it's important to do that, but your reviewers might not. The second aspect is the methodology, and it's more about the how. So you need to include a good enough descriptions of the type of instruments that you are going to use, the data collection procedure. You may want to include a power analysis, maybe, and that will determine the number of participants that you might need to achieve the aims of your proposal. you need to outline your outcome measures. So how will you define success in your application? And also you need to provide context about your team, and that then will align with feasibility. Because that's one thing also that the panel will look at is you might have an excellent idea that might be an important idea as well that might have great impact, but you might not have the capacity to do that, and you might not have the right infrastructure or the right support in terms of colleagues and collaborations. So when I think of grant applications in general, so there's these core principles, the what do you want to do, what's the gap, and what is the novelty, why is it important to do it, and why now, and how also the methodology, and why so why is it that you are the best person to do this research? So you need to convey all these points in your applications. And again, you need time to let it sit. So you write your first draft, put it aside, sit on it, and then come back to it a bit later, show it to other people, and you'll be surprised how often there are bits you can improve on to something you thought was pretty good in the first instance. Yeah, think of your audience. So your reviewers are in the fields of dementia research and clinical experience in dementia. But they're not just experts. And as Jane has outlined, these applications, your application, will also be read by people with lived experience. So you need to have a language that is appropriate for that, and also in terms of your involvement or how you will involve people living with or with lived experience, and how they play and contribute to play a role to the research process. And also it's central to the research process in general. In dementia, you need to involve people who have lived experience. And it's now in the WHO blueprint for dementia research. So you can't do your research in isolation. You need to have participation and involvement of people living with lived experience in your project. And as Jane has mentioned already, the involvement is before as well as during your project. So talk to the Sydney Dementia Network, the LEAP panel. Do you have an advisory panel as part of your proposal? Do you want to also have a co-investigator as part of your proposal? Now, the cure dementia fallacy is aiming too high. And again, people reading your grants will pick that up very quickly. So you know that you can't. People have been working on trying to find treatments and better diagnosis and disease-modifying treatments for years and years and years. So your grant can't cure dementia and is not meant to be. So what we want is, again, a good idea that is feasible within the time frame and the scope and the money available for a project. When you write your introduction, it's okay to jump right in. You don't need to explain what dementia is or the types of dementia. Again, think of who is going to read your application. Use appropriate language. This has been covered already by Jane. And again, the panel will see through tokenistic involvement of external parties like associations, people living with dementia. Now, the next point, obviously, you need money to do that. So you budget. There's a finite amount of money, but be realistic in your budget. And don't pad. There's nothing worse than people adding, oh yes, and we'll need $5,000 for printing something unless it's really needed, just so that gets you to the top level of funding. But you need to provide enough information to assess feasibility of the project. So, for example, requesting $50,000 for an RA support is not enough. You need to provide information, details, provide the level of appointment, the number of hours per week, etc. You provide justifications. So again, reviewers will assess easily whether what you're requesting is realistic and needed, and also that will speak to feasibility. Another aspect important is that, and again, so that's a point that Jane has already mentioned, you need to factor in reimbursement for travel for study participants, and also as a token for participation, yes, and also cost of things that we tend to forget, like advertising, phone calls, and the like. When you do your budget, it's also okay to include other sources of funding. So you might have enough to do part of it, but if you say, hey, actually, there's support from my school or from another grant that will ensure that the aims of this particular grant are met within the expected time frame, that also speaks to feasibility. And it's not a bad thing to have if you can do that. Clarity, again, it's coming back to the writing. We talked about acronyms already. Do you need them? I tend to avoid them as much as possible. Use acronyms if you use acronym of the same terms for, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 times in your applications. If fewer than that, I would always spell out. It's easier rather than having to go back to page 1 because there was one acronym you can't remember what it means. Now, the next one is the AI siren, and I know that it's something that is becoming increasingly important. People will use AI tools. Whether it's good or not, it's not my place to decide, but let me tell you that I can detect something that has been written by an AI tool every single time. It's extremely well written, but often the content is completely empty behind. If you want to use AI tools, don't use them to generate ideas. You need to have the idea. You need to know what you want to do. Write your applications, and you may wish to check whether you can write that more clearly using an AI tool or not. I would suggest that it might not be needed, but it's for you to decide. Again, be kind to reviewers. We know stuff, but we don't know everything. So you need to write and rewrite and rewrite your drafts. Get external feedback by other people. It's important. And again, remember the 2-step selection process. So you want to make sure you're in the top 50%. And as Jane said, make your grant stand out. So write well and write in a way that is punchy and clean. That's all for me, and good luck.
Thank you, Olivier, for providing us an insight into the mind of a reviewer. Next up, we have Dr. Weihong Zhang. She's a previous winner of the Dementia Australia Project Grant, and Weihong is going to be giving us some tips and strategies on how to write the project grant. Weihong, it's up to you.
See my screen.
Yes. Do you want to
Present mode?
Yeah.
You seeing it all right?
We're seeing it with your notes.
Oh, still the notes? Oh.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah, it's all good now.
Right. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity for me to share my application experience. And also on behalf of my research team, I would like to express my gratitude for the support from DAF to provide for my project. So firstly, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So today I just would like to give you some ideas or maybe tips. Hopefully that will help you to be the next successful applicant. So I'll start with some brief background of myself, then briefly talking about the project. How do you make it clear in terms of your significance, meaningful outcomes, and make it a clear overview of the project. And also how do you specify like your team, the expertise supporting your project. And also, like Jane was saying, involving the right people. So briefly about myself. So I'm an occupational therapist with over 20 years of clinical experience. So I'm specialized in geriatric medicine and geriatric rehabilitation. So you will see how that actually relates to my application later on. So my PhD was finished in 2023. So on the topic of gait, cognition, and falls from theory relationship between cognitive impairment and gait disorders and their combined impact on the risk of falls. And I also investigated falls prevention strategies for this particular population group, people with cognitive impairment and gait disorders. So my supervisors for my PhD were Professor Li Fei Lo. She's an expert in dementia area. Professor Emeritus Lindy Clemson, so she's the queen of falls, so has significant contribution to falls prevention, and also Associate Professor Josephine Green. So currently my research focus following my PhD, I'm still involved heavily in the areas of falls prevention and also healthy aging. So my research project is the Safe Steps program. It is we're developing a tailored falls prevention program for people living with cognitive impairment. So it's a co-design process and also it's a feasibility study. So actually 2 phases. So in my proposal, so as required, it's only 7 pages. So I covered project title, the summary, the aims and objectives, and also we talked about the methodology covering 2 phases, which is phase 2 and 3. I'll explain that. Then a bit of analysis and also the expected outcome and impact, knowledge translation, consumer involvement, and also you need to include your budget and timeline as well as references. So that's 1 page is quite limited space for that. So I think for you, as Jane and Olivier were talking about, you need to make it really clear to your audience what your project is about, so really catch their attention. So I think it's really important to make a clear overview of your project. So our project for the DARF grants is actually part of a multi-phase project. So it's altogether 4 phases. So at the time of my application, our phase 1 was already underway. So the grant application is to be covering our phase 2 and phase 3. So the Safe Steps program will be co-designed with people with living experience of cognitive impairment and the carers, the clinicians, researchers, program facilitators, and also policymakers to ensure the relevance and usability. So, and I made it clear in my application, the grant is to support my phase 2, which is the co-design workshops, and phase 3 is the feasibility study, so over the 2-year time. And also clearly list your aims. Like I have 2. The first one is about the phase 2, the co-design, and the second one is about the feasibility study. So as people already said, it's really important for you to make it really clear in your application of the significance of the study. So for example, so that's the requirement, provide a plain language summary of your proposed project. It needs to be de-identified. So as my project as an example, so how I word it out, so I said, people with cognitive impairment, they have a higher risk of falling. However, they're often excluded from the mainstream falls prevention programs, which are typically designed for people without cognitive challenges. So as a result, this group often missed out on effective support and outcomes from existing programs are inconsistent. So I clearly stated the gaps in the field. So similarly, about the meaningful outcomes as well. So from our project, if our project is successfully conducted and implemented, so this project will addresses a critical gap and aligns with national dementia strategies that call for inclusive, person-centered, evidence-based care to improve health outcomes for people living with or at risk of dementia. So this is also like linking the gap to your potential the meaningful outcomes if your project is successful. Same thing in terms of the knowledge translation, and I worded clearly in terms of the short-term, medium-term, and long-term, how the project will impact on the practice in the field of falls prevention in people with cognitive impairment. For example, short-term, based on the phase 2 and phase 3, we immediately will share the outcome with the participating LHDs and also aged care organizations. Medium term, so it will be implementation guidelines, facilitator training resources, and recommendations for program delivery, particularly for this population group. And longer term, hopefully, insights from the project will inform future service models and contribute to dementia inclusive approaches to falls prevention. So clearly stating out the short term, medium term, long term that will give the reviewers a clear pathway or the impact of your project. So just to give you the feedback, I'll share some of the feedback from the reviewers. So in terms of the project, it says, it is an important project that is well designed and clearly articulated. The proposed project has the potential for significant and far-reaching impact through upscaling in the future. So I think this is quite important when I listed out the 4 stages out of my whole project, the bigger picture. And also as Annette has already mentioned, the purpose of the Dementia Australia, the DARF project, is to facilitate early career researchers to help them to move on, to have prepare them for bigger grants application. So the knowledge translation plan is well developed and clearly articulated, and also how the resultant data will be used in the broader program of research is clearly articulated. So you can see this is just some of the extracts from the reviewers' feedback. So as Olivier was talking about, like we really need to be very clear with the instructions of the project, the grant application, the instructions. You need to have a very thorough understanding of it and the scheme of the grant, and address all the application requirements clearly. So, for example, in terms of the purpose of the DARF project grant is to support new and early career researchers. And also in terms of the project team, we encourage applications from multidisciplinary teams, and also recommended that people living with dementia, their carers and families, are involved. So I'll see how I address these requirements. So this is the team. So we have 3 associate investigators, Dr. Sally Day, Rick Dawson, and Morag Taylor. So they are 2 of them are early career researchers like myself, and Morag is a mid-career researcher. And also we have involved Dr. Peter Stanbury, as I think at the time, I just realized when I was listening to Jane's talking, but I think last year we're still using the consumer representative as the term. So Peter is also a lead member from Sydney Dementia Networks. So I think it's a variety of the expertise the team is bringing into the project. So one thing I would like to raise in terms of the number limit of the AIs to be included, it's only 3 as researchers. However, we have 5 investigators on the project. I found the hardest part of my job in terms of the application is actually to decide who to be taken off from the application list. So after careful consideration, I had to take off Professor Annette Moxey and Professor Anne Tidman, although they are very supportive. Even their names are not on the application, but they have been part of the project. They have been providing me with ongoing support. We really appreciate that one. So if possible, I would say in the future, if there's any changes in terms of the application, I really would like the number of the associate investigators can be increased a little bit, at least for the project grants. I think there's a little bit bigger picture. We might need to include more people. All right, so how do I address the multidisciplinary team in terms of providing diverse expertise? So this is like a little bit of extraction from my career progression statement. So that's also linking back to my background and my PhD study. So it's all related to people with cognitive impairment and also false in terms of false risks. So this project aligns strategically with my existing research and will significantly expand my expertise. So make that clear in your application. And also because I have 3 early career researchers in the team and also have mid-career researcher. Although for the project grant, it didn't specifically say you need a mentor, but I have Dr. Marek Taylor as my mentor for the project. So I will receive dedicated support from Marek, mid-career physiotherapy researcher with strong track records in falls prevention for people living with cognitive impairment. Also, I will collaborate closely with Dr. Rick Dawson and Dr. Sally Day with their diverse expertise, linking to the phases, different phases like co-designing people living with dementia or cognitive impairment, and also falls prevention. So just spell it out clearly how their expertise is going to contribute to your project. So the feedback is the applicant has a strong track record relative to opportunities. Their prior professional experience attests to their capacity to develop as an independent researcher. So I think that's really important for you to articulate how the importance of your experience, professional experience. As Jane mentioned, we not just Jane mentioned, but also in terms of the requirements of the application, we include people living with living experience of dementia. So as Jane said, you're not just saying we're going to involve them, we're going to do this, we're going to, they're going to be on the team. Not just that, you need to provide the details and exactly how they're going to contribute. So for the application, there are actually 2 parts. So how they have been involved and also how they will be involved in your project. So in terms of our the person with living experience, I listed clearly, there are at least 5 different aspects and he will be involved. So he has been actually shaping key elements of the proposal, providing guidance on how the project could provide support and contributing to the development of the co-design approach. And he has been reviewing and providing feedback on the plain language summary and also ensuring the language used is respectful. So in terms of how he will be involved in the project, he will continue as a key contributor throughout the whole project and also participate in the co-design workshops. So all the time, we have 3 co-design workshops and he'll be participating all of them, and also review and help refine participant-facing materials and also contribute to the knowledge translation activities. So as mentioned, we also included this in the budget, how we gonna support the meaningful engagement of our consumer representatives as well as the participants with the lived experience. So you can see the feedback. It says consumer engagement is evident and consumers are embedded throughout the proposed research. So in addition to ensuring you have the right people to be included as a research team, also during our project, because it's a co-designing and a feasibility study, especially with the co-design phase, we also would like to include the right stakeholders throughout the project. So we have included four groups of stakeholders who will be engaged in the co-design process. So they include older people living with cognitive impairment and their carers, falls prevention program facilitators, clinicians and researchers, and also service and policy representatives. Right, so the key message to take home, so you need to understand the funding scheme and instructions thoroughly and address all the application requirements clearly, include the right people, and start early. So just reiterate, start early and get the application reviewed. Thank you. That's all from me.
Thank you very much, Weihong. Thank you for spelling out each aspect of your application and then intertwining the feedback that you received to show us what a successful application looks like. And congratulations on your award. Now, before I introduce the next speaker, I just want to say for the audience is that feedback is very important to us. And we've been doing these webinar sessions for a few years now. And in a few moments, Shannon's going to put a link in the chat, and it's a feedback survey so we can understand really what you think of this information session. What's good, what's bad, how can we change it moving forward? If I could just encourage you to just open that link now, keep it in your browser tab, and then at the end of the webinar, just in case you exit and you don't copy the link in time, complete it then. But really, we would value your feedback for the next year's information session as well. Thank you again, Weihong. Our next speaker is Dr. Simon Maksour, who's the Race Against Dementia Fellow, and he's going to be talking to us about what a successful postdoctoral fellowship looks like. Thank you, Simon.
Thanks for the introduction and the opportunity to speak here. So just a bit of background about myself. So I did my PhD at the University of Wollongong, and I was using stem cells to understand early cellular and molecular changes in Alzheimer's disease. I then did my first postdoc, still at the University of Wollongong, doing a drug screen in motor neurons for motor neuron disease, and now I'm started my fellowship last year, developing a gene therapy for Alzheimer's disease by targeting microglia at the University of Sydney. So I just wanted to chuck this slide in because you might not hear about it, but what you see is on a CV, it might look like a clear path from when you submit your PhD to when you either submit your fellowship or award it, but it really is not a linear process. And I just wanted to highlight some key steps along the way that built my application up, even though they might seem like failures at the time. So during my PhD candidature, I had the opportunity to work as a casual research assistant in Professor Lozanoui's lab, where I started working with microglia. So I didn't have that expertise before. I went overseas to a conference in Hawaii where I met Professor Renzo Mancuso, who's based at the University of Antwerp in Belgium and leads a very exciting program on microglia and Alzheimer's disease. So that's a key point that I'm bringing up because it might be early on in the piece, but Renzo actually ended up being a co-investigator on my application and gave me the opportunity to go to his lab for 6 months to complete some research. So it didn't look like much at the time, but that's something that came back 2 years on that was very important. So yeah, I started this interest in targeting microglia as a therapy from my own work and seeing what was done in the field and submitted my first grant as CIB on a NHMRC IDEAS grant in May 2023, and this was unsuccessful. So I wanted to try and build my track record, and the research was still underway. So I actually submitted a review which got accepted in Journal of Neurochemistry with Lozanoui on this topic, so microglia in Alzheimer's disease. I was fortunate enough to get some seed funding from our institute, so it was $7,000 to start setting up microglial transplantations as a therapy. And I was also fortunate enough to get another small pot of money from our uni to develop microglial targeting AAV, which is where I started a collaboration with Leszek Lisowski at Children's Medical Research Institute, who's a leading expert in gene therapy. And again, this was another person that joined my research team through this work. So we tried our luck again with another NHMIC grant where we would pitch the therapy in motor neuron disease just because that's what I was doing my postdoc on. Again, we were unsuccessful. Tried our luck with vitamin D impact, again unsuccessful. We're getting positive feedback about the technology and the approach, but in M&D, the field's a bit behind on neuroinflammation, and we still had the same feedback in M&DRA. So again, we thought that the technology's there, we have the tools, and it might be time to go back to my PhD and my track record in Alzheimer's disease, where I then submitted a fellowship to Dementia Australia and was fortunate enough to receive it. So the reason I want to show this is it doesn't look like a linear path most of the time. Each person's experiences are different, but there's a lot of hiccups along the way, a lot of challenges, but they all contribute to making a strong application, building your project, building that network, which I hope you can see from small interactions at conferences can add big value to your own applications. So just some tips on writing a strong fellowship. It's important to have a strong team with diverse capabilities. Make sure these are complementary. Start early and pitch your idea widely. So we've heard this from a few other speakers today. So when I was writing my fellowship application, I actually shared it with a microbiologist and a fly geneticist just to make sure that the concepts are still clear. And make sure that you are sharing this with both people with scientific backgrounds and people with lived experience as well. So be resourceful, build on your challenges, your trials and tribulations. These seed grants and failed applications actually build your application up more and really strengthen it in ways. So one of the biggest things I want to highlight is the first page of your application is make or break. So you really want to have everything that's important for your application on that first page. So lead with the knowledge gap or problem. So this is my application, and you can see that I kick that thing straight off into that. So you want to make sure that you are highlighting the need and the pressing and urgent need of your application. So highlight the approach and aims clearly. So again, I lead into how the knowledge gap and what we plan to do addresses this gap. And then having a schematic always makes it easier for reviewers to understand what you plan to do and how this will deliver what you are saying it will. So you want to highlight the capabilities on your first page in a brief way. So again, saying why you're the right person, what tools and platforms you already have, and the team you have supporting you. And end with clear outcomes, so both short and long term. So one thing you can do along the way as well is building your CV. So at times it's good to take a step back or even get support from your supervisor or mentor and see where your CV might be lacking and start working on areas that you can to fill in those gaps. So the CV I used for my fellowship, I covered on the first page in text, I covered my metrics, the knowledge gained from my research, the impact from my research, and my leadership. So they're key points that you want to start building on your CV anytime you can to strengthen your chances of successful fellowship applications. So it's important to show track record in the field or the techniques you propose to use, or have a team that can support those. But what's good is reviews are a good way to demonstrate expertise if you don't have the primary research papers in those areas. So, and when we're talking about leadership, these include supervision, mentorship, being on committees, both internal to your institute or external, grant and paper reviewing. So the other sections I had in my CV were my grants, awards, academic and community service. So we've heard a bit from Jane, and I was fortunate enough to start partnering with her during my fellowship application process. And I just want to pull this up here because again, like she mentioned, the scientific writing is very different to how we write these lay summary sections. So what I thought was a lay summary was not, and it's important to have this bi-directional feedback and interaction with these people who've lived with people who lived experience and form these successful partnerships. So to do that, avoid tokenism, make sure it's bi-directional, that you are helping them understand your concept in a clear, concise way using analogies. And I also want to flag that don't underestimate the value of these partnerships. So Jane has been able to connect me with clinicians in Weihong in Melbourne for other work. Another person with lived experience I work with, Jackie, she's connected us with a stem cell researcher over in America, in New York. So the network these network people with lived experience have is very vast and very valuable to your research. So start involving people with experience early in the piece. This has to be almost when you're thinking about putting in the application, and be genuine about wanting people involved. So avoid tokenism. It's a waste of your time, a waste of their time. So you really want to be genuine, and it is valuable. So if you're fortunate enough to get invited for an interview, what you want to make sure to do is know your story well. So explain how you got to the point you are. So explain what seed grants or what prelim data you were able to generate that started the basis of your fellowship application. Make sure it's a coherent story. Use analogies. So I actually met the night before my interview with Adekunle, who was a previous Race Against Dementia fellow, and he gave me some very good advice, which was to adjust my PowerPoint to include analogies. So I don't think I would have got the fellowship without his advice. So talk to people about this, get their experiences, input as well. So make sure you show passion, not just competence. So they're also funding you as a researcher and not just your projects. So you really want to convey that. And prepare a clear impact statement. So what will be different after your fellowship? And I just want to touch on briefly the perks of philanthropic funding, so through Dementia Australia. So the Race Against Dementia Fellowship is actually worth more than an HMRC investigator grant. It has a lot of additional perks as well. So Dementia Australia are really great at sharing your profile, which expands your reach. They've shared videos of my research, which has attracted international students and collaborators as well. So that's something that you'd miss out as well going through NHMRC. There's access to networks and lived experience and dementia advocates. There's travel support and access to a national and international research community as well. So it's really beneficial to go for these schemes. So I guess just to wrap up, my key take-home messages are seed funding goes a long way. Even though there might be small pots of money, they're critical for just getting that extra figure that might be supporting your fellowship. So they build your track record as well. They help you expand your network and start building your team and your research story. So very important to go for those. The next take-home message was just to go after it. So it's not a linear process. It's not straightforward. It is challenging, but things you can start doing now to boost your chances is building your CV. If it means joining another committee or asking your supervisor if you can have an honor student, a supervisor, a third-year student, or be a mentor to one of those in your labs. And then try and build that preliminary data package as well. So the other advice I have is listen to some and don't listen to everyone. Everyone's got an opinion, and you have to start learning to filter out what's going to be more valuable, what feedback is more important. So you have to also trust your judgment a bit. And the last point I had was just to be resourceful and resilient. So the timeline I showed you, you could have seen there's a fair few failure or rejections in there, but they weren't failures. They helped us tweak our approach a bit, help keep developing the technology to a position that we could apply it for something that is going to develop something meaningful. So thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for providing a very holistic view on, how to write a fellowship and all the tips and tricks. We next have the previous Dementia Australia Mid-Career Fellowship recipient, Associate Professor Helen Macpherson. Up to you. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you. Just get my slides ready. Okay. These all good?
Yeah, do you want to have it in presenter's view, please?
Oh, there we go. Okay, so is it all right now? You can see properly?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. So thank you for everyone for sticking around to this part of the presentation, and I will make this pretty brief. I mean, you've already had a lot of tips and kind of the details about the applications. I'm going to talk a little bit more about knowing that it's like the right time to apply for something like this, and focusing on a mid-career fellowship. These are probably more established researchers, so I'm sort of going to target the presentation from that point. So yes, I received the mid-career fellowship last year, and it's developing a digital solution for timely dementia diagnosis. So a little bit about myself. I am largely a dementia prevention researcher. I have been in research-only positions for my career to date, and I've always worked in the area of cognitive aging, healthy brain aging interventions to reduce dementia risk. So this has always been, my area. I have been fortunate to receive funding from DARF several times. I received the travel grant in 2024, and I've been an AI on 3 project grants as well. So I've had quite a long relationship with DARF. So my first fellowship was a Deakin postdoc fellowship. And then after that, I received an HMRC ARC Dementia Training Fellowship. So this was just a one-off scheme that really built capacity in the dementia workforce. And I also have been part-time for the past 7 years. So I really genuinely appreciated the funding from Dementia Australia Research Foundation, because they did take into account my relative to opportunity, and they did take into account my career disruptions. And, that hasn't always been the case for me in academia. So it was almost a point of, do I keep applying for things because I can't demonstrate the same track record as a full-time researcher? So, don't be deterred by that for this scheme, because they do take it seriously. Now, in terms of where I was at for this application, I was right at the end. So it was up to 10 years, and I was 9.8 years post-PhD. So this was my last shot to apply. So I really had to go for it. I did apply a few years ago, maybe when I was about 7 years post-PhD, but for a different project. And, just for some benchmarking, I mean, I don't know how much emphasis there is on metrics, but I think it's useful to kind of see where other people are at with their track record. And I had about 80 publications at the time of applying, which would be equivalent of about 130 for the full-time equivalent. So my project is working with Dementia Australia on their BrainTrack app. So Dementia Australia have developed an app which is designed with games that are played monthly, and app users, which are people over 50, can track their cognitive performance using the app, and then they can share their results with their GP to initiate discussions around dementia and brain health. And so my project is looking at validating these games as assessments of cognition against gold standard cognitive assessments. And then because what is missing is sort of any clinical cut points. Although there's a report for GPs, it's not integrated into any of their workflows or diagnostic processes. And then the other part of the project is then looking at some co-design with GPs and nurses who will be seeing patients who bring in the reports from the app and looking at how they interpret the report, how we can refine the report, and how the results can be integrated into diagnostic pathways. So I'm just going to cover a couple of aspects that I feel were important for me to know that this was really the right time and that my research was at the right point for this kind of funding to be successful. So I guess the first point is really, for me, it was having strong partnerships because my research was based, with a partner. And the first step was that my research team had received MRFF funding to look at the usability and the acceptability of the BrainTrack app when it was first released. And this was led by Alison Hutchinson at Deakin. I was a CI on this grant. But being involved in this grant, this was sort of commenced prior to the release of BrainTrack, I was able to really identify an important gap around the potential of the BrainTrack app, which has been really widely used. But, we didn't know, are the games a valid measure of cognition? Can we use this to kind of augment diagnostic processes? And so being involved in that project, I was then able to lead my own research program, really sort of springboarding off that first project. And yeah, coming back to, I guess, the importance of seed funding, I was given some seed funding by my institute, and I led the pilot testing of the BrainTrack app before it was released to the public. And then I worked with the app developer to make changes and improve the app before it was released. So I've really been involved in the development stage of the app, the assessment of, do people like it, through to now the program that I'm leading, which is, can we use it in a diagnostic sense or a pre-diagnostic sense? And this partnership, has been recognised. I received a mid-career research partnership award from my faculty with Dementia Australia to, demonstrate the impact of this work. So, we really had evidence to show, this is a very strong partnership. I guess the next point, which has had quite a lot of coverage today, and I'll just talk about how I have approached this in my research, is, the genuine involvement of people with lived experience of dementia. So I guess, some tips around this is, take opportunities to get in front of people. I had the opportunity to speak to Dementia Australia's Business Innovation Consumer Advisory Group and, talk about the project that I was planning to put in for this. I got some great feedback. Some people emailed me afterwards and I asked if I could use quotes from them. So, able to gather some of that kind of information regarding, the value of the project. I also established my own advocate group as a part of my travel fellowship grant. And so I, at my institute had sort of a consumer panel that we could access, but they had, a broad range of different conditions. And I wanted to look at people who, had a specific interest in dementia research and lived experience as carer, family member, spouse, etc. So I developed, my own specific panel for my research group. And as a part of this, this project was presented there, and we actually submitted 4 applications last year to DARF, and the 2 that were funded were the 2 that, we presented to this consumer group. So, I think especially for the other project that I was involved in, led by Michael Wheeler, the advice given from the advocates, it really made a huge difference to his application around, telling the story of his research. So I absolutely, recommend having kind of an ongoing relationship with people who can really add value to your research from their experience. And then from this panel, I invited consumers, advocates to be on the steering committee for my fellowship project. and any time commitment that was involved, I put into the budget as well for the grant. Oh, oopsies. And then I guess another, hang on, let's go on. No, all good. Another aspect is, the time frame where this project was at as well. So I guess this was a well-established research program. I had been working on getting funding for this project for around 3 years. So essentially, I had submitted to the MRFF twice, and also an NHMRC partnership scheme. So obviously this was for a larger version of the project because, with the fellowship comes project funding, which is a lot smaller than you would receive from the MRFF or NHMRC partnership. So part of that was refining what is the first step of this research that we need to conduct in order to, then leverage off this work and, hopefully then be able to have success with some of these bigger funding schemes. But I guess for that, it meant that the project is quite well developed. We've had 3 years of work. I've had rounds of grant feedback from external assessors for these other schemes. So, I feel like I'm very living in this research program. So I guess the other thing is, we have really lots of partners I was able to talk to about this research, like primary health networks, for instance, and get them on board as partners for this research as well. So I guess I feel like I wasn't scrambling to pull anything together for this application, except finding the time to actually write it in terms of what the program was going to look like and, the project components. This was, a few years in the making to reach this point. And then I'll just finish by saying that although this is a fellowship, so it's sort of focused around me, it's, obviously a team effort and, in terms of the other bigger funding applications that we have put in and will put in future. So, I have the 2 AIs mentors, Professor Alison Hutchinson and Professor Liliana Orlana, and that they are implementation scientist and a biostatistician, which, really is able to support my work as, the researcher driving, the cognitive side of things. I have the researchers, Tanya and Callie, the partners from Dementia Australia who've been involved in developing the app. And then we have, a team of researchers and clinicians who have really contributed to every step of the way in designing the project, and then the app developer as well. So I guess, looking at it from this perspective, it's not really about you as an individual, although, you have to sell that in your application. Behind that is a whole team of people that is really making this kind of work possible. Okay, thanks, guys.
Thank you, Helen. We do have a few questions on the Q&A forum. Maybe we'll start off with a few of them, and then Joe and I have also collected a few of the questions which the participants had asked at the registration form. So we might ask you guys those questions as well. So the first question, I think Annette wanted to answer this, is up to 6 years, including the 6th year for post-PhD.
Yes, it might be easier just to say that your PhD needs to be awarded on or after the 27th of July 2020.
Thank you. The other one was, I think the second question was a student who has developed an AI model to detect MCI stage of dementia at earliest is trying to opt for PhD. Is he eligible for the, I'm pretty sure if it's a PhD, is he eligible for a travel grant?
Yeah, so if they're got the health professional background,
Mhm.
and they're currently a PhD student or they're going to apply to become a PhD student, they can apply for our postgrad stipend. PhD students can also apply for our travel grant. If they want to apply for a fellowship or project grant, it just has to be awarded by the time that our funding agreements go in and the project starts. So if you think you'll be submitting, well before the end of the year, then yeah, it's okay to apply.
And the next question was again to Annette. A lot of questions to Annette. For the postdoctoral fellowship, it says two awards. Is it for one of each, like one from DAF and one from Race Against Dementia, or two at each?
Yeah, that's correct. So there's one Race Against Dementia and one Research Foundation grant. But as I mentioned earlier, we will look at our grants at the end of the year, and hopefully we can award more than what we've advertised.
And if I'm not wrong, we can apply for both postdoctoral fellowship and project grant in the same round.
Yeah. And actually, I forgot to mention this. In the past, if you had a similar project, we were asking people to submit a project grant separately and the postdoc separately. But we thought to be a little bit more efficient with time and the burden on reviewers, if you want to submit a project grant that is in the exact same area and basically similar to your postdoc fellowship, there will be a tick box in the form, and you can tick that and then upload a one-page summary of how that project grant is a bit different from the postdoc, because project grants are 2 years, postdocs are 3 years. So it's just about outlining what are the tweaks in your aims and what are the tweaks in your budget. If you've got a project grant that's in a totally different area to your postdoctoral fellowship, then both would be submitted.
Thank you. And I think the next question might be for Jane. A professional development or a travel grant, can you describe the kind of involvement of people impacted by dementia that might be appropriate, like including in the budget, or is it not applicable for this scheme?
So the question is if you're applying for a travel grant.
Yeah.
Well, I guess, your travel grant would be in relation to some sort of research project that you're doing. I mean, maybe Annette needs to address this too, but whether there are specific questions in the travel grant application about involvement of people impacted by dementia, rather, Annette, or not?
Yes, there are. If you, the way I was sort of envisioning the involvement of people with living experience is like if you're wanting to use the professional development grant for some travel at a conference, you might want to co-present with a person with living experience that was involved. Also too, because we're implementing collaboration and celebrating that as well, you might want to put in your budget some time to talk to people with living experience and get them to help inform your project. So there is many ways you can do it, and it's just about having a think about, like what you mentioned, Jane, about what's the best avenue and the best way to make it all work. But there's definitely questions in there as well in the application form about living experience.
You. And the next was, again, I think it's directed for Annette. Could you please explain or provide any example on how to provide evidence for career disruptions?
Oh, yes. So we sort of tend to follow a little bit like what NHMRC do, but I think if you want career interruptions, it's important just to give us, a brief outline of what it is. Like, is it parental leave? Is it a medical condition? And then provide the amount of time that you think your career is disrupted. And so that way we can just check that you still fall within the eligible limits.
Yeah. The next question is from Rosanna.
Sorry, I was going to say I could speak to that as well if you'd like, because that was included in my application. My institution just got us to fill out the same kind of template that they use for any early or mid-career scheme where you've had a career disruption or been part-time, and it calculates, the specific time. So you have that as evidence. And then the institute, like my grant department sort of sign off that that was accurate. And then, I was able to write, the description just in the application about, how much time and what that was for. But it was also sort of had that evidence held by the grant office.
Thank you, Helen. And the next question is from Rosanna, and she asked, for the professional development and travel and collaboration grant, is it possible to visit 2 different labs if it falls within the budget?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the main thing is that you justify the need of why you need to go to those 2 labs and how it boosts your professional development and, the outcomes that can come from both.
Yeah. I think the next question is also pretty similar. And the following that, what would be the preferred term? Family carers of people living with dementia, or family carers of people with dementia, or any other term? Jane, you might be able to answer this.
Look, I mean, the language is fraught, isn't it? And people have different preferences. I'm quite happy to be referred to as a carer. Other people prefer to be referred to as a care partner. In terms of, and sometimes we're referred to as family carers, sometimes we're referred to as unpaid carers. So there are lots of options. So in terms of, carer of, generally it's, if you're talking about the carer and the person living with dementia in the same phrase, you'd probably say carer of a person living with dementia. We seem to always include that. I think the idea of living with rather than just a person with dementia is more acceptable. But again, anybody that you're partnering with, you need to ask them what their preferred language in relation to who they are and what they do is. So it's a very personal thing, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Jane. I think I missed this question. Can the travel grant be used to stay, in 1 or 2 places for an extended time to learn and build relationship versus visiting a large number of people for a shorter time? It's almost like a second. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're quite flexible. I think in the guidelines booklet it says that that if you're going to go travel to another institution, it can't be more than 6 months. But the length of the agreement is a year. So as long as all your activities are done in that time, that would be fine.
And the next question was, what grants and fellowships are applicable, are PhD students eligible for? Is it just the travel grants for now?
The travel, and if they're a health professional, the stipends as well. And if they're near the end of their PhD, they could definitely consider submitting for the project grant and postdoc fellowship.
Yeah. And any specific guidelines needed to be followed for when budget is involved, open to the entire audience? Olivier, would you be able to, or Annette, what do you guys look for the guidelines?
Just a comment about the budget. For me, it's again coming back to providing enough information to justify what you want to do. So, yeah, it's as the example that I gave, I think was probably a good one. If you need RA time, say how many hours you need and cost it. Don't just say I need RA time for an amount of X number of dollars.
Yeah.
Because then we can assess feasibility.
Okay. So Joe and I have selected a few questions which we thought was important. Joe, do you want to ask a few questions from the document registration?
Yeah, sure. So some questions came in before the webinar. And one question that I thought was good that we didn't really touch on was really, let me bring it up here because they articulated it very well, is whether the Dementia Australia Research Foundation considers projects or research into other potential causes of dementia. And that could be CTE, concussion, acquired brain injury, and then I think adding to that as well, like childhood dementia. I think that's definitely required, is a field that needs a lot of research. So, Annette.
Yeah, and Olivia can add to this one as well. But what we support work in terms of any forms of dementia at any age. I know that there are some conditions that may not necessarily be really specific on dementia, but end up with dementia-related outcomes. And so, as long as the outcomes of the proposal is tapping into that and looking at cognition and memory and behavior related to dementia, that's totally acceptable. But we support all forms of dementia and research applications that address that.
Wonderful. Pradeep, did you have a question that you want to ask?
Yeah, one of the questions I think a lot of them wanted to know is like, what was the success rate last year for the fellowships or for the mid-career or the project grants?
Oh, I don't have that information off the top of my head. It's on our website, actually. But
Okay.
someone at the conference asked me about this, and I worked it out. I think it's some of the schemes like the clinical practice stipends and the travel grants, and even the translational grant have quite good success rates. But the most competitive scheme was the postdocs last year. So I think it was roughly like 5 or 8%, something like that success rate. Yeah, that was the most popular one to apply for.
Yeah. There's a question, if you don't mind me asking you, Pradeep. I like how it's been worded. What is the risk appetite for DARF? Do you like, I guess, pie in the sky kind of grants, or are you a bit, or is it a bit where it's ambitious? The question asks, or is it kind of conservative and perhaps there's outcomes that can easily be achieved? I guess that it applies differently to each of the funding categories, but in your experience in that over 12 years, what do you think has really surfaced?
I think definitely, as long as the research behind your idea and you're presenting a really good case for it and your methodology sound, we'll consider it. And I think with the pilot funding, that's the opportunity where you can start getting some pilot ideas and try and test something that not anyone has ever thought of before. So, but yeah, every now and again we'll get a project and we're like, oh, that's really interesting. That's different. I never thought about that. So we're hoping that that's a scheme that can give people a chance, not only to kickstart their career, but give them a chance to actually find a breakthrough or, some sort of a therapy that really improves the lives of people living with dementia.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There was one question which I think might be important, which came in the Q&A. How important is to state that for a fellowship for us that you're going to go in for a secondment? Does this impact the application in any way?
Sorry, what was that last part?
The secondment, like, do we need to state that we're going to go in for a secondment for a fellowship application?
Oh,
And
secondment. Yeah. Yes, if you want to, yes, you can talk about that in the career progression section of the application. Yeah. And I know that with the Race Against Dementia, that's something that they encourage to go off to another lab and learn from other people. And that's why they all come together with their symposiums and the like. So I think, yeah, if you've got something planned, you can place it in there.
Maybe one last question, which for all the panel members, maybe in a sentence or two for you guys to say, what do you think makes a successful grant stand out? Like, maybe going from Jane.
Oh, look, I think it has to be clearly written and well articulated. Yeah. And make sure that explain its relevance really clearly and how it's going to benefit people living with dementia and carers. That's really important.
Thanks, Jane. Helen?
I think the story of the grant is really important. Where is this piece in, the pathway to having a benefit? Is it early on? Is it, leveraging off, previous work? Is it a stepping stone? And just really being able to tell that story from, where your work is to where the benefit to people is.
Olivier?
I agree with both Jane and Helen. Yeah, a simple story. Think of your reviewers. If you need to keep them in mind and take them along your journey so they know what you're talking about.
Thank you. Weihong?
I think for the project wise, like for me, I found it's important you clearly articulate what the gap is and how your project is gonna make a difference. I think make it clear.
Simon?
Yeah, I think having a really strong idea that is achievable in the time frame, and then again, the first page is where you either win a reviewer over or lose them. So try and put all that information into that first page in a clear, concise way.
Thank you. And finally, Annette.
I would 100% agree with all of those comments and 100% agree with all the different tips and tricks that everybody's spoken about today. I think all up, it's just having that planning. You can see an application that's been well thought through and planned and considered and wasn't a rush job, 2 days before the due date. So I think it's about just really thinking about the application, what the story is, and then being able to articulate that really clearly.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for everyone for sticking around, and please provide us with some feedback, which is there on the chat. Please click on the link, which will help us improve the session in the next coming years. Just to summarize, I think it's a very highly competitive grant, which means you guys, if you want to make sure your grant stands out, make sure you involve the dementia advocates, start early, identify your gaps in research. Make sure your lay summary is very well written because it's going to contribute to 20% of your grant. And maybe I can speak for both Simon and I. We both are Race Against Dementia fellows. It's a very, very overall development fellowship, which provides us with a lot of leadership opportunities as well. Please reach out to us if you have cleared the first round and you're going to the interview. As Simon said, Kunle was able to help me as well, when we reached the interview stage. Please reach out to us, and thanks to all the panel members for sharing their knowledge. Thank you all.